All right, my friends, the time has come for us to field test the MaimeriBlu Watercolors. If you guys are new here, I did a three-part unboxing swatch set of videos because this was part of my Easily Influenced series. So I tried out one of their introductory sets. I tried out the Jenna Rainey set in conjunction, that's the right word there. I tried out the Jenna Rainey set in conjunction with Everyday Watercolor, and I tried out the Jeannie Dixon set in conjunction with Hello Watercolor. So if you are interested in either of those artists and their books, I hope you guys will check out my other MaimeriBlu videos. But I figured it was time to actually paint something with these watercolors, and y'all, I have to say I am delighted with how they handled and how it turned out, and I cannot wait to share my thoughts and my experience and my process with you guys. Patrons are going to have access to this line art over on Patreon. This is a combination of 3 sets: their introductory color sets, their Jenna Rainey sets, and their Jeannie Dixon set, as well as several open stock colors that I was able to purchase at David's Art Center here in New Orleans, Louisiana. Some stores carry these open stock, some do not. I would recommend getting the sets as they are significantly cheaper than attempting to buy them open stock. I am painting on Arch's cold press watercolor paper, the 140 pound, that has been stretched to a corrugated plastic board and held tight with blue painter's tape. And I am creating kind of an underwash of color here using wet into wet and a lot of diffuse color, so it'll kind of tone the wildflowers that I'm going to paint onto it. I'm going to throw as many different techniques at this watercolor palette as I possibly can to see what sticks, and this video has been time-lapsed 8x and then again a further amount. So this is not meant to represent real-time painting, nor is this meant to represent a tutorial, but it is a field test and demonstration of how these paints handle. You guys can find the individual reviews for all 3 of the sets. I will link them for you guys down in the description below. 2 of these were part of my Easily Influenced series and come with longer videos. I also added in colors that I thought were necessary for the kind of watercolor that I like to do, which is very whimsical, figurative illustration with a strong cartoony bent. So that's kind of the lens that I'm going to be looking at these paints. I'm also going to be doing a lot of color mixing throughout, and I also want to note that the paper stretched really poorly this time and it really buckled, so I really had to work around that. For that loose wet into wet toning wash, I use yellow, orange, hot pink, and ultramarine blue. The colors really diffused out very prettily. I allowed it to dry fully, and then I did another toning wash with the same colors on top of it. These paints really like to diffuse out wet into wet. They move a lot and they might contain a lot of oxgall. I like this kind of soft diffuse movement, but I know that not everyone is looking for this when they're painting with watercolor. So for the actual painting, at least with the wildflowers, these handle really well. It might be a bit more opaque than I might like, and it could just be the colors that I'm picking, and these might be a little too prone to reactivating, but that could be that the paper might still be wet underneath it all. But in general, these are very easy to mix, really brilliant colors, but I'm also not really trying to do anything super complicated with these. I'm not sure that they would handle grise or bluet very well. So because these dissolve and disperse so much, it does kind of seem like they're prone to reactivating and moving unless they are fully dry. These are pretty fun to paint with, and the color is really vibrant. While I'm not sure if these are the best fit for me personally because they are kind of pricey, I can definitely see why they're so popular with some artists, and I can definitely see why floral artists might like these. Also, a little color goes a really long way with these two paints. And I do want to point out that these have been dried and set up in half pans for quite a while. This is how I personally prefer to handle my watercolors, but I did find that using them from the tube, you do still get bright and vibrant colors. It's just a little bit easier for me in this format. I know some of you guys have pointed out that you really prefer your colors right out of the tube. There's nothing wrong with that. This is just about a different way to handle them. You guys can also see for the wildflowers, I'm doing a lot of color mixing just to try to make sure I'm getting the colors that I like. I found it very easy and intuitive. I really did not struggle with mixing color with these. The results are colors that are really pretty and dreamlike. You can get more saturated colors, you can spritz them to encourage movement, you can layer them, you can blend them out. I feel like the binders used in these paints must be decent quality because they allow for a decent amount of flexibility. That said, there's also a fair amount of opacity to these, which does allow for some layering and correction, but might muddy your line art if you're using a inked line art. They're not as opaque as Lukas or Schmincke or Rembrandt or Turner. I feel like they're probably similar to the Mijello tube watercolors with perhaps more immediate color payoff. And the color payoff translates into the ability to mix really fine and delicate washes, add in details, or go full color if you wish. Color mixes hold up well, and you can see that with the blue-violet flowers, the larger pink and purple flowers, and even the evening primrose. So from an artist standpoint, I am referencing the flowers that I'm painting. So these are all real flowers, and I am trying to color match or at least color replicate with what I'm seeing on the screen. So I'm not working from memory, and I am doing a lot of color mixing to try and make sure that I get tones that I see in nature rather than just using straight up what's in the half pan. Different artists have different working methods. This may or may not work for you. I'm just sharing my experiences because if you handle watercolors like I do, that might be useful to you. Or even seeing the watercolors in action, creating a real watercolor illustration may provide enough visual information for you to know if these are worth it for you and a good addition to your palette. Now, I did a bunch of different techniques with this. So one of the things I have noticed with Fieldtest is if I kind of forget that I'm doing a Fieldtest, if I just get into the flow of the painting, get into the zone, enter a flow state, that is a really good sign for the quality of the paints. If I don't have to really think about how to make them work and I can just experiment and play with them and try different things, that's a really good sign for the paints. And I really enjoyed painting with these. They were able to take layers and reworking, and they had some opacity that really allowed them to stand out. And I did, in the end, re-ink this piece, I think just a little bit, but I had so much fun with these. And honestly, I think watercolor should be fun. It should bring you delight, whether you're working with student grade, fine artist watercolors, fine watercolors, artist watercolors, professional grade watercolors. I think you should be able to have fun with what you're painting, and you should be able to paint what you can imagine. And I do believe that these watercolors are delivering that. MaimeriBlu is an Italian brand. I believe it is being brought to the US by Fila. That's kind of a parent art supply company. They also sell Princeton brushes. So that might be why you see some of these influential artists who are getting featured as Jenna Rainey and Jeannie Dixon, for example, with the MaimeriBlu collaborations. They also have Princeton collaborations. So there is like some collaboration in the company itself between the different brands. This distributor also carries Strathmore as well as Canson. So I just thought that was interesting and worth noting that you are going to be seeing more MaimeriBlu products and Maimeri products in general, because they also have oil paints in your larger art supply stores. Like, for example, I bought mine at David's here in New Orleans. You'll probably be able to find them on Blick. You'll probably be able to find them on Amazon. And I do think accessibility, being able to find these products in a store near you, is really important. That contributes to you being able to try these products, to use these products, and if you fall in love with these products, to purchase them open stock. So my local store does have them open stock. I can pick up tubes if I want to be able to pick up tubes. The only thing that's kind of prohibitive here is the price is a little bit steep compared to some of the other brands that we've talked about, but you got to do what's right for you, for your paintings and your wallet. Now with this field test, I might be a bit biased because I'm painting flowers, but I feel like these lend themselves really well to florals. They have great qualities for painting beautiful, delicate, and impactful flowers, whether you prefer to be more abstract or more detailed. And this is what field tests are for. I didn't really care for these paints all that much when I swatched them initially, but now that I'm really painting with them, I'm exploring options with them, I'm trying different things with them, I started to kind of fall in love with them. Now, on an artist's note, right now the flowers feel kind of disparate. So I started making some notes to myself in my notes doc about some areas that I wanted to address as we made progress. For example, adding some indigo lower on the page for more shading, maybe doing a bokeh effect far later in the illustration, which we do indeed do, and perhaps even lifting up some of the lines on the burgundy echinacea. Remember how I kind of forgot that I was just field testing? I did take notes, but I kind of just enjoyed painting and playing around with these, and I got into the vibe. I spent a lot of time painting and fiddling around with the wildflowers, trying to get them just so. And these paints allowed me to do that. There are some watercolors that I've tried that you gotta toss in the towel when you toss in the towel. I saw that with the Supervision tube watercolors, right? You're only gonna be able to do so much, but with these, you can really do a lot with them, and you can really work with it and kind of play around with it and have fun with it and massage it into what you're looking for. And to me, that's really what we want to see from professional grade watercolors. We don't want to fight with the watercolor, but we want to be able to play and explore. And I think now is an excellent time to remind you guys that I purchased all of these paints, all 3 sets, all the open stock tubes. I purchased those out of pocket with funds from Patreon, so all opinions are my own. My patrons would still fund this even if I hated this product. My patrons will still fund this even if I love this product, and this enables me to give you guys honest reviews and to speak from my heart, and to that way you can trust me when I say I like something, and you can trust me when I say I don't like something. And I really feel like I need to point this out because I ended up really liking these watercolors and not having a whole lot of complaints about them. So I wanted you guys to know that this is absolutely not sponsored unless you count my Patreon, and that I just enjoyed these paints on this paper with this illustration, and I really love how this illustration turned out, and it just brought me joy. And that's what I'm looking for when it comes to watercolor, is I want to have a painting experience that brings me joy. So with these paints, I really felt like it would be beneficial to try and adjust the camera and get you guys like on top of the paper so you guys can see what I'm doing. I have a new camera mount coming in that should allow more flexibility, because as it was for this one, I had to remove my phone from my Rode mic stand and use a secondary little mini easel sort of thing. It's like a folding phone holder for some of those shots. So they're not as good as they could be, but it really inspired me to like try and mix up my shots a little bit more. And I'm hoping that the new camera mount will work for that, and we can get some really cool dynamic shots that really allows you guys to see the properties of the paint like we're doing here, where we're able to get on top of it and take a look at it. I also slowed down, so this review has been sped up quite a bit, as you guys have heard. So for these segments where we're pulled in and you can really see the paints, and you can see me lifting it up with a little bit of paper towel so that we can get a really nice gradient where the center of the flower is a little lighter than the edges of the petals, which gives the impression that the petals are curling away and we're getting some shadow there. I slowed those down so you guys could see what I was doing. Whereas with these more pulled out shots, which just kind of are meant to give you guys an idea of what the palette looks like, how I'm handling the palette, how I'm handling my brushes, how I'm handling the ceramic mixing palette that I'm using for this. It's meant to give you guys a more generalized overview of how I'm actually handling these paints. That's been sped up because, well, to be real, we were pulled out so far anyway, it can be kind of hard to see what I'm doing. So think of it kind of as a bird's eye view. But you guys can see I have some thinner washes like I'm applying to these flowers here in the background. I'm also using a spritzer of water to encourage color and pigment movement and blooming so that we can get some more excitement going on. We can get some more movement going on. And some of the watercolors that we've talked about do not move. And I have found out that that's because many colors are made without oxgall. Like Holbein, for example, is made without oxgall. So they tend to kind of stick where you put them. I really like a good degree of movement to my watercolors. That's why you guys see me pulling out the spritzer bottle and encouraging movement. And I felt that the MaimeriBlu watercolors had a good amount of movement for the quality of the paint. You don't want it moving so much that every time you try to paint over it, it goes everywhere. But you also don't want it so sticky that when you're trying to get it to move, it doesn't want to go anywhere. So for context, I spent about a week working on this painting and I really just enjoyed every bit of the process. I didn't feel like I needed to hurry up and get it done, but I also didn't feel like I was fighting really or struggling with these paints. I was just enjoying it and kind of existing in the space of this illustration. So you guys can probably see why loose floral artists probably love these paints. You can get some really nice brush strokes in them. They don't turn to mush, and they're also not overly stodgy and opaque. They have a good amount of translucency to them, which works really well for those sort of loose floral techniques. You guys can also see me dabbing in some purple into a wet into wet and encouraging it to diffuse out and add some shading there. This close-up, you can see what I was talking about these having some opacity. Here we have a warm yellow that I'm dotting in as pollen around the flower. And while it does dry a little bit more translucent than this, it does still really hold up against the flower and give us that effect of pollen. I'm also dabbing in some orange and some red. And one of the neat things about this is this paint in saturation has enough body that you can do those kind of wet next to wet dots, and they don't all just flood each other. They don't all just kind of cover the area. You can get kind of, I would say, a good amount of detail with these paints. A lot going on with the flowers. We have a lot of detail, we have a lot of color, and we spent a lot of time on the flowers. So for the background, I wanted to keep it kind of simple. So I am applying a two-color background wash. So I'm switching between my brushes. I have two brushes that I'm using, a silver black velvet and another silver black velvet. And I'm alternating between our cooler yellow and kind of a phthalo or an indigo blue color. And I'm applying our yellow first. And then in areas where I want it to be a little bit more shaded, like say beneath certain flower petals, I'm going to dab in some of that phthalo blue, and we're going to create kind of a mottled effect with this. I really thought this shot would work, and then my arm ends up covering it for most of the time, so apologies. So earlier I mentioned that I wasn't really sure how this paint would handle with a grise or a bluet sort of underpainting, and I decided to try that out with her hair. So I want her to have kind of like a honey blonde or a light brown hair, and I want to keep it really warm, and I want to keep it kind of light, but I want to create some definition. So I'm using that same phthalo blue mix that we used with the foliage to start kind of underpainting some of her hair so that it actually looks like she's in and part of this environment, as opposed to just kind of like standing out completely. So I am doing a little bit of a blueyer. With this illustration, there was a lot of do a thing, let it dry, go do something else, come back, think about it, adjust things, noodle with things, mess around with things. So you're going to see me going into an area and then reworking, like with the foliage here with our blues. So at this point, I'm adding the blue first to our shadow to create darker shadows, and then blending that out with either water or with the yellow. And this is still that 2-brush technique. And when you think about it, I am doing a lot of add some paint, let it dry fully, glaze over that paint, which with some paints that would cause them to move and to reactivate or to turn to mud. And what I was looking for was fairly clean, clear, translucent glazing abilities. And I feel like the MaimeriBlu was able to deliver on that. And that is something that is hugely important for the kind of watercolor work that I like to do. I think my best pieces really have that in them. And I have a lot of field tests that are really kind of meh because I wasn't able to do that. So to me, this is a property well worth pointing out, that if you like being able to do clean layering, clear glazes, and not have it just fall apart or turn to mud, totally reactivate, these paints are very workable. They are reworkable, they are liftable, but they are also workable. Like you guys saw with that red flower, I've changed it to a burgundy flower with some glazes of like red mixed with green to kind of create a burgundy color. And I was able to do that. And I worked the heck out of this burgundy flower. I was really not satisfied with how I handled this burgundy flower, and I like painted it a lot. So if you want to lift and rework, the colors do lift fairly easily and rework, which is a good sign because sometimes you want to be able to do that. And this also tells me that we would be able to do bokeh if we want to. Now at this point, I must admit, I feel like I have a tendency to overpaint sometimes, and this is kind of giving me that feeling. Maybe because the colors are a bit more opaque than I expected, and they might look better if I re-ink this piece. I probably applied too thickly or did too many layers, but I'm painting the way I always paint, and these paints kind of allowed me to do that. So that's another thing. With some paints, they hit a limit, and then you can't really do much more layering or fixing because they're just not going to have it. These will allow you to continue to work and fix and rework, and that's not always a good thing. So you can see I'm kind of reworking the burgundy flower, working some more red in because I felt like it was kind of too dull and too one color and it felt kind of flat. These paints will allow you to rework them. So I did a water splatter technique. So I'm splattering on water, letting it sit for a bit, and then picking it up with a piece of paper towel to lift out little droplets. And I'm just trying to build in some texture, build in some different chromas, some different like saturations, because everything was kind of hitting at the same note. And that's kind of boring and honestly kind of exhausting to look at. So while I was working on the flowers, I was still deciding what I wanted to do with the girl. I decided on honey blonde or maybe a very light brown hair using yellow ochre mixed with warm yellows and then a little burnt umber. I was thinking about bright blue-green eyes, maybe primrose pink on the skirt with a purple or blue-violet corset and ribbons and beads, maybe a dark green skirt when I was thinking about having it blend into the foliage. And I decided to start with the skin and the hair and then judge from there because I didn't actually go in with a set color palette when I started this. So skin tones with these paints, these are really gorgeous in thin layers. You can really build up soft, delicate layers in the skin, super soft, delicate wet into wet blushes. Some of the techniques that we see from Japanese artists, you can do that with these paints, especially on a cotton rag paper like this one. I can mix up very light and translucent skin tones that glaze well and build up gently. And the same for diffusing red into a blush tint. This is really pretty, especially on this paper, as you guys are able to see. And I was able to build it up in such a light, delicate way. seriously, look how pretty this is. Look how I was able to work in that shadow color. Look how I'm able to work in that blush and diffuse it out, and it doesn't dry with these harsh, weird, crazed lines, and we're not getting any weird scaling. And on the skin tone, we're not getting any distracting granulation. So really enjoying these. I've done so many layers on the skin, building it up, and I've done so many wet into wet blush washes. And while I'm still kind of working on it, it hasn't gone muddy on me. You can work really lean with these watercolors and they still have the same color to them. Not all watercolors work with thin glazes. And I've been using pretty dirty water and it hasn't really muddied anything yet. And that said, I do fill my wells in my ceramic palette, the one you see right here, with a Klein bottle, not from the cup. So even if you aren't great about switching out your water or working with 2 cups, these won't go muddy on you too fast. I really like how this piece is coming along, but at this point, I was definitely thinking I was going to have to re-ink and clean up some of the lines. I mean, for real, how many layers have I done on the skin? And it hasn't turned to mush. It hasn't gotten muddy. It doesn't look bad. I'm able to really gently and delicately build it up. It makes me wish that I'd been able to do this on Moulin de Roy, because that is my favorite paper to paint on. And these paints are just so fun to paint with. And it would have been such a good combination. But unfortunately, Canson is discontinuing Moulin de Roy. So I'm running out of sources to get my fix from. And I got to be careful about what I use it for, because I need it for my Louisiana food series. So even though I did this on arches and the arches really wanted to misbehave, I still really love how this illustration turned out. And I hope you guys love it too. so check it out because we're going to start on the hair and I think this is going to be really cool. So we decided on like a lighter hair color, right? Because I typically paint like brunettes and darker hair colors and not a whole lot of blondes, honey blondes, that sort of thing. So I'm working with a yellow ochre plus warm yellow plus yellow mix, right? And often when I'm working with yellow ochre, and I love yellow ochre and I use it all the time, but when I use it in hair, sometimes it has a tendency to get too thick and get too opaque. And I was able to still get color out of it while keeping it really, really light and being able to build it up and being able to glaze it over this phthalo blue where you can still see the phthalo blue influencing the color. And I just think that's really cool because this is something I often struggle with. This is also the point in the field test where I was just vibing. I wasn't taking notes. I was just enjoying myself. I felt like the painting could speak for itself. I felt like my tone of voice would carry this. So I don't have notes for this. Just rest assured that I was like in the zone. I was enjoying painting. I was playing with different camera angles. I was just having a good time. And to me having a good time with the paints is some of the highest praise I can give because I'm a watercolor comic artist. I do a fun job, if you know what I mean, but it requires hours and hours and hours and hours of leaning over a painting and a lot of commitment. And if it's not fun, it can start to feel like torture. But when it's fun, I'm in heaven. I could spend almost all of my time doing this. I will forget to eat. I will forget to hydrate, right? And I'm not saying that's a good thing, but I'm saying like when you have ADHD and you have a tendency to hyper-focus and your hyper-focus is art and art supplies, the ability to sink into a painting and just exist in it and enjoy it and like experience it is really nice. It's so refreshing. It's so nice not to have to fight with the paints and to just be able to execute what you can envision in your mind. So to me, that is some of the highest praise I can get. I know it's not like checking all of the tick boxes. That's kind of what we try to do in the unboxing swatches, where the field test is really like notes and vibes, but mostly vibes. Because when you're painting, if you're painting for reproduction especially, it kind of doesn't matter if you're painting with student grade, artist grade, fine, professional grade watercolors. What really, really matters is that you can paint what you can imagine. You can paint what you want to paint. You can paint and try out your impulses, and you can make a piece that you've either learned something from, or you tried a bunch of things from, you had fun with, or that you really love. Now, when you're selling your art, obviously those archival properties, those light fast properties are important, and that's not an area I really test for here on the channel because I'm a comic artist, so I'm painting for reproduction. The archivability is important, but I'm gonna scan these pages and create prints out of them, my end goal differs from some other artists. And hopefully that makes my feedback unique and different because we have different goals in mind. So you can totally watch this field test review and then turn around and watch somebody else who has a different art motive, a different art angle, and you'll hear maybe very different information, maybe very similar information, but it's going to give you a more well-rounded view of how these watercolors handle and whether or not they're a good fit for you. Because not everyone paints to make fine art. Not everyone paints to sell their originals. Not everyone paints to work for a company. Some people paint because they love watercolor, and having a well-rounded view of whether or not this product is worth their money, whether or not they're going to get enjoyment out of using that product. And isn't that part of making art a habit, is that we enjoy making art, the process of making art, if not always the product of making art. So that's why I'm really focusing on how much I enjoyed painting with these, how much I felt I was able to do with these, how little I felt I struggled with these, how I was able to handle them the way I wanted to handle them, with only a few issues regarding the opacity, and even that is not really make or break. I'm very used to having to re-ink my black inked pieces anyway, so that's not really a deal killer for me. as I neared the end of this illustration, I decided I wanted to try doing a bokeh effect. Right now, I'm kind of filling in the beads on her necklace, but this whole time I was thinking about doing a bokeh effect, add some visual interest, break some things up, and try a lighting effect that I think is beautiful and that I haven't really played around with. And I'm kind of stealing some pages from the Let's Make Art book and how she handled the bokeh effect in some of her kits. So see, I'm using something that I learned from another artist. I believe this time it is Sarah Cray, and she made it very accessible to try out and learn this technique. So now I get to bring it in and try it out with my own art. So kudos to Sarah Cray for me being able to learn a watercolor technique from her, because we are always learning. We're always learning from other artists. We're always seeing things that other artists are doing and bringing that into our own work. And sometimes it's nice to be able to give a little shout out here and there. So I'm kind of like working up to that bokeh. I thought I was at it, and apparently I'm not. But at this point, I'm kind of building up her hair, adding in some ochres to kind of darken the hair that's in the shadow. And what that's going to kind of do is it's going to kind of create contrast, and it's going to make the lighter areas of her hair pop more by receding the darker areas. So we've got some depth and we've got some volume. I'm trying to make sure that this painting doesn't get too flat or too single, like everything at the same saturation, because while that can be a fun effect sometimes, it can also be very tiring to look at. I figure you guys are aware of this. Since this is a time-lapse video, this is editing Bokeh, who's had almost a month away from this painting to think about things and to let things marinate, but it's also distance from the painting, which means sometimes I forget exactly what I did where. So this is really more bird's eye look than if I were doing, say, a start to finish tutorial, which I try to record the voiceover for that closer to when I've painted it, but that's not always feasible. So where I'm going with this is sometimes I jump the gun. Sometimes I forget to mention things. Sometimes I surprise myself by how long I spent working on something or how much I ended up reworking something. So I think it's a cool aspect because it allows me to kind of self-critique. It allows me to learn from my own art and allows me to share some of my thought process with you guys in a way that if I was narrating this like as soon as I finished this painting and I was starting to feel kind of burnt out, I might not be able to do. So I want to talk to you guys about that bokeh effect. Not all colors are universally lifting, nor should they be. So I did a kind of modified bokeh thing where I would lift out a circle, then dip in some yellow while it was still wet to create kind of like sunspots. I'd been strongly leaning towards re-inking, but after I started doing the bokeh, I started leaning away from that. I feel like it might ruin the sun-dappled bokeh effect. I would have liked to have done larger bokeh circles because I felt like I kind of limited myself with the smaller ones and it's kind of boring, and some bigger ones would have been really pretty. But I was using a Princeton brush and I was having a lot of trouble getting the Princeton brush I was using to lift the pigments while not dripping all over the paper. This is me and my forever struggle with synthetics and why I'm always looking for better synthetics. So I do think a few really big bokeh spots would have been really cool to do. And my brush was just not really facilitating that today. So rather than fighting with it, I just kind of leaned into it and kind of developed some techniques. But these work really well for this technique. I had a lot of fun with this, and I would really love to play around with this technique a bit more in the future. when you see me pull out the white gouache that we are almost done. And I spent a long time on this illustration. I really enjoyed like every minute of it, and I'm really happy with how it turned out. If you'd like to see this available as a print, let me know down in the comments, and maybe we will turn it into a fine art print and offer it in the Netto shop, because there's already been some folks asking me when I was going to offer this as a print on Instagram, and I'd like to get a few more people who are interested in it before I commit to ordering prints. But I love how it turned out. It turned out so pretty. And here is the up-close view before we pull away the blue masking tape. Now, pulling away the blue masking tape is so satisfying because the blue does kind of affect how you see the painting. It does kind of change things color-wise. So removing that blue painter's tape allows you to see the painting for what it is without those blue borders. And I really love how this illustration turned out. She is so cute, and I had so much fun using the MaimeriBlu Watercolors to paint this. I am really glad I gave them a field test try because it really changed my opinion on these paints. What are my pros and cons? Let's start with the pros. In practice, these paints produce beautiful colors, particularly in dilution. They don't get used up too quickly. A little goes a long way. They are very mixable. For the most part, they produce very clean color and mixes, and you can really lay on the delicate soft layers. The cons are they're kind of expensive, and saturation with these builds up fast. They are also somewhat hard to find. I'm really glad I field tested these and with an inked piece that I love, because these really surprised me. With the initial unbox and swatch, I wasn't impressed, but these really came through in a practical setting. These handled pretty much everything I threw at them, and I can see why other artists like them. In terms of bright, vibrant color, I feel like they're a bit cleaner and brighter than Daniel Smith and maybe Winsor Newton, and they are perhaps comparable to Core, with not quite as much color punch in your face as Core tends to deliver. So if you are looking for somewhat expensive but very easy to work with watercolors that deliver vibrant, brilliant, and clean color that works well in lower saturations, MaimeriBlu might be the watercolor brand that you're looking for. If there are any other professional grade watercolors that you feel like I am missing out on, make sure you let me know down in the comments below. I love your suggestions and find them to be so helpful in finding our next great watercolor palette. As you guys can see, is the resulting watercolor illustration painted with the MaimeriBlu watercolors. I really enjoy painting with them, and that's kind of funny because when I was doing the unboxing swatches, I was really kind of nonplussed with these watercolors. They are kind of expensive. They do have quite a bit more opacity than I was looking for. They are very finely milled, so that granulation with most colors is not particularly noticeable. But they are really high quality watercolors, so you can really water them down and they still carry that color with them. They blend beautifully wet into wet, and you can really build up and layer and blend and rework and even lift your colors. They are a joy to paint with. The only problem is they are kind of expensive. I purchased most but not all of mine from my local my local brick and mortar David's Art Center in Metairie, Louisiana, because when I can, I do prefer to give my business to local businesses, especially businesses that have been such a big part of my life. And I have been shopping at David's since I was a 14-year-old artist. So, you know, they've really been quite formative in my development as an artist. But I did also purchase the introductory set. Actually, I bought that one at David's. I bought the Jenna Rainey set and I bought the Jeannie Dixon set. And so this is kind of a homunculus of those three sets plus additional colors that I might find helpful. If you buy them in the sets, they are more affordable than buying them open stock. And I mean by like a lot. Open stock, they are very expensive watercolors, and the sets are actually very reasonably priced. You can maybe find them at your own local art supply store. You can find some but not all of the sets on Blick, and you can find, I think, all of the sets on Amazon. So if you're interested in these watercolors, if you were impressed with what you saw and you think this would be a good fit for you and how you paint, I will have links down in the description below. Thank you guys so much for joining me for yet another field test. I really enjoy painting with you guys, and there's been some demand to turn this one into an art print, so I'm heavily considering that. But if you enjoy my art and you would like to own some of it, I do have art prints available in the Natto shop at nattosoup.com/shop. And if you are interested in owning some of my originals, you can contact me at becca.hilburn@gmail.com. Thank you guys so much for hanging out with me today. Reviews like this are made possible thanks to the generosity of my wonderful patrons that you guys will see here. I hope you guys have a wonderful day. I hope this was helpful, useful, and informative, and I hope to see you guys again really soon with another art supply review or tutorial. Bye guys!